Hello everyone. Today I will be featuring the Tier 8 American heavy cruiser Wichita. Now I'm obviously going to be comparing the ship to the American Tier 8 heavy cruiser Baltimore a lot because, well, they're both the same ship type of the same nation at the same tier. Now this is not exactly the nicest comparison to make, because you gotta keep in mind that the Baltimore is very strong at tier 8. Baltimore is an absolute monster at tier 8. The only reason people kind of overlook just how strong the Baltimore is because, well, a vast majority of players don't really know how to play heavy cruisers. They're usually a fair bit more challenging than, for example, light cruisers where you just park behind an island. And the other reason is that the Baltimore doesn't have a heel, and it often gets up-tiered into tier 10, and the lack of heel usually keeps it kind of in check, so to say. But anyone who has ever played the Baltimore against tier 8 matchmaking knows just how strong that ship is against equal tier ships. So being compared to the Baltimore is, to begin with, a pretty rough task. Now the first thing I do in the Wichita is I push up using island cover and using the great concealment, and I pop a radar from behind the smoke, and I manage to catch out 2 DDs. So a very strong radar to begin with, as we're getting a lot of damage in on these 2 DDs, a Mayhem and a Sashio. Now this is something I need to highlight though, because this is something that's going to give the Baltimore a pretty damn big edge in the upcoming patch. There is these changes in the upcoming patch. There will be changes to the flood mechanics and to the radar mechanics. Namely, they are normalizing all the radars across the board. Now right now both the Wichita and the Baltimore have 9 km radars. Now the Wichita has a bit of an advantage by the fact that its concealment is 9.5. Whereas Baltimore's concealment is 9.9, but they both have 9 km radar. Now, this obviously gives a bit of an advantage to the Wichita when it comes to sneaking up with the radar, but next patch, when they're normalizing the radars, they're actually normalizing all American cruiser radars to 10 kilometers. That means Baltimore, Buffalo, and Des Moines, they're all getting buffed to 10 kilometer radar. For the heavy cruisers, but the Wichita is not getting that buff. It's gonna stay at 9 km radar. So in the upcoming patch, the Baltimore will have 10 km radar with 9.9 km concealment, whereas Wichita will be stuck with 9 km radar and 9.5 km concealment. So the advantages it has in sneaking up and using radar, the advantages it has over the Baltimore, next patch they're gonna go out the window. That Atlanta, by the way, used the infamous tactic of going flat broadside and somehow being immune to citadels. That is a pretty strong tactic and pretty hard to deal with, because you have to give the RNG gods their due. The Farragut decides rushing the Atlanta is the best choice. Don't ask me why, but you can see his help will evaporate quite quickly. And I'm trying to get that citadel in on this Atlanta. You of course have the improved AP angles. The heavy American cruiser improved penetration angles are fantastic, as it allows you to use AP more frequently than you could really in any other cruiser. These are deep water torps, so I'm not afraid to dodge them. Now this is where the Baltimore gets another advantage. It has pretty much identical, the Wichita has almost identical gun performance to the Baltimore. The same reload, pretty much the same gun handling, you got the same improved autobones as I mentioned, but the difference is that you're using the New Orleans higher velocity and, well, lower weight shells. Now these do less damage, the AP does less damage, and more importantly you have less penetration. The Baltimore of course has that super heavy American AP, which allows it to get that great penetration, especially at longer ranges, whereas Wichita's penetration, well, it falls off quite significantly in comparison. If you shoot HE, you're identical, there's no difference there. The shell velocity and the speed and the reload, pretty much everything is the same. It's just that the Baltimore does it better thanks to those super heavy shells. That's not to say it's like bad AP. The AP is perfectly fine, especially if you get same tier or top tier. I mean, we can take this. The advantages you have is of course that your shell velocity is faster, so it is easier to land. And if a cruiser gives you broadside like this at 10-11 kilometers, well, you can teach him a pretty significant lesson and chunk him out hard. So by no means are these bad guns, it's just that, well, as I mentioned, you're gonna get compared to the Baltimore, and the Baltimore is not a ship any heavy cruiser really wants to get compared to, because the Baltimore is so damn good at pretty much everything it does. Now, because it is a tier 8 heavy cruiser, it obviously means it also gets access to that amazing 27mm plating that the Baltimore has. 27mm plating is exceptionally useful, of course, because it allows you to bounce 380mm guns, which when you are against same tier ships, that's a very common caliber, Nelson not included with those big guns. The problem is that, once again though, when we compare it to the Baltimore, we realize that in terms of survivability, it doesn't quite reach the same values. It has 37.9k health, in comparison the Baltimore has 42.4k. So we're talking once again more than 10% health advantage in favor of the Baltimore. Especially when you don't have a heal, you don't have any additional way of increasing the survivability besides, well, dodging or tanking. This is once again a pretty big advantage in the favor of the Baltimore. That's not. It has practically no torpedo protection either, so if you want to run defensive AA because of all the carriers like I'm doing here, well, you better make sure you don't eat any torpedoes because they hit very hard. The torpedo protection, 3 or 4%, either one. Basically, you won't even notice that you have a torpedo protection. That's how non-existent it is. The Citadel does extend above the waterline as with most cruisers, but to be fair, it is very small. And overall, the slight advantage in concealment does make it a bit easier to disengage than what the Baltimore had. Its major thing that it's really got going for it, I keep comparing it to the Baltimore and finding it wanting, which is kind of harsh, as I mentioned, because the Baltimore is such a great ship. But it does have some advantages, and that's mostly its handling. It does 33.6 knots. A bit of a weird number, usually it's like 33.5, but it does 33.6 without a flag. You add in a flag in, and obviously this is pretty damn fast for a cruiser. It also has a really fast turning radius at 680 meters and with a very fast rudder shift at 6 seconds. Now the advantage of having such a fast rudder shift of 6 seconds means that you can actually slot the acceleration module on the cruiser without any worries. And that means that you stop and start extremely quickly, and basically you can take off and surprise targets quite easily. So in terms of handling, it's very good across the board. Basically, against not just compared to the Baltimore, but compared to pretty much everything. This thing is very agile, and combined with the fact that it's quite small and has good concealment, it's a nasty surprise for many DDs. You can really catch them off guard, as you're about to get a pretty damn good example right here. I know there's 2 DDs up front. You can see the speed accelerates quite quickly to the top speed. This is with a flag, so we go easily past that 33.6. We're 34.5, and we're closing the distance. More important, concealment 9.5, radar 9. So I know as soon as I get spotted here, I will almost right after be able to counter radar and catch the enemy DDs off guard. That's honestly what I'm waiting for at this point. I'm waiting to get spotted. I'm hoping my Scharnhorst can deal with the Sasho, because that's not exactly an easy fight to take. I get spotted, I wait a few extra seconds, I pop my radar. Both DDs get caught off the guard before they can turn away, before they can dodge. So in terms of especially anti-DD performance, the Wichita is very good. Now it becomes a lot harder, of course, if they got teammates helping them, so you can't just rush in like a madman, but it's very good at what it does. It's very good at hunting down and dealing with these destroyers whenever you have the opportunity. Now, considering this is a cruiser that's heavily based on concealment, considering its lack of health, and in general the whole design is heavily based on having good concealment, obviously in the current meta it kinda does suffer a fair bit because of carriers. Carriers spot and spot and spot and spot all the time, and tier 8 is the kind of... It's a kind of tier where you end up facing a lot of tier 8 carriers, tier 8 premium carriers, and tier 10 carriers. So something that people will no doubt ask about is the AA, and the AA is okay. I would say the AA is decent. It's not gonna win any amazing prizes, it's not top tier among tier 8s by any means, but it's okay. The problem is trying to rate an AA for this kind of commentary feels kind of silly, because there's hotfixes all the time. There's changes going on. The rework just came out, so the AA values can greatly change. Can you hold your own against the tier 8 carrier? Yes. I've had no issues doing that, especially with defensive AA and switching manual AA side. I've been able to shred planes going for me quite consistently. So it can absolutely hold its own. Will it be able to hold its own against high tiers? That's a bit sketchy. Unlucky with the torpedo hitting me right on the nose. I have to hit one, but I want to keep pushing because, well, in case you haven't noticed the game that's going on, we've been down to like almost no ships against pretty much the entire enemy fleet. So I'm trying very, very hard to carry this game to a victory. And it does give you an idea, of course, of the agility of this ship, how quick and nimble it is to handle. Trying to dodge these torps, he's RPF torping me. You see the located sign up there, that means he's got RPF pointing at me. So I'm constantly changing courses a bit to throw off his aim and try to avoid eating too many of those torps. As I mentioned, with no torpedo belt, the torps really, really hurt. So, how good is this ship? Well, it's a good premium. It's a balanced premium. Is it an excellent one? No. Is it an overpowered one? No. Is it quite as good as the Baltimore? Not really. Especially not with the next patch coming out that's gonna normalize the radar ranges, which basically means Baltimore gets a 1 kilometer radar buff, Wichita gets no radar buff. And the Baltimore already has that super heavy AP, and it already has that better tankiness all working in its favor. So the Baltimore has a fair bit of advantages going into this comparison. But being worse than the Baltimore doesn't mean, once again, that it's a bad ship. Because the Baltimore is, in my opinion, too strong for tier 8, but it's something that people don't really pay attention to because, well, tier 8 gets thrown into tier 10, and when you have to face Buffalo and Des Moines, you kind of forget something like a Baltimore even exists. So, would I recommend this ship? If you like the American heavy cruisers, it's a pretty solid ship. It's... especially if you get games without CVs. Now, that's probably going to have a big impact. How popular are the carriers going to be in the rework? Because any ship that relies heavily on concealment will lose value in carrier games. That's just the way it works. It works across the board. I mean, if you play the Irian, the torpedo Kutuzov, basically, Irian is a ton of fun in games without carriers, because you can actually push flanks, you can torp from stealth, like you can use the gimmick, you can use the thing that sets it apart from the Kutuzov, you can use it to great value. But if there's a carrier, then you practically become useless. So, oh well, your torpedoes become very useless because you can't push any flanks in a squishy cruiser because you'll just get blapped. So, how popular the carriers are will have a great impact on just how much fun this Wichita will be. Not a bad ship, but very situational. Two Pensacola and Mayhem pushing up this flank. I told my Ironhorse to go cap C. I'm gonna see if I can go deal with them. Popping that radar. It looks like he is stopping. Is he slowing down? Got a surprisingly bad opening hit. Only one hit. I thought my aim was on point. And surprisingly he's actually stopping, which throws me off. And this time when I get perfect dispersion, I actually over-aim. This makes me a bit sad. We're gonna get one more volley off on him. Hopefully this one will be enough. Only 5 hits again. We needed a bit more than that. Some incoming torpedoes, but once again, with the acceleration and the handling of this ship, I have no real issues dodging that. Having dodged the torpedoes, there's no reason for me to let these double fires burn, and I damage con them. Pensacola tries to use that heavy American, well, not heavy American AP, but improved American AP against me, but I maintain my angling, and you can see, of course, just how good this AP is. Normal cruisers might struggle to get citadels from the angles I am. I do not. I kill off the Pensacola, my fires on the Mayhem finish him off as well, so we get high caliber, a double strike, and Kraken with the same volley. The issue is though that I know that there is a Warspite and a Tirpitz and a Baltimore pushing this flank here. That spotting means that, yep, that's a radar, that means the Baltimore here, 3 ships targeting me, that means the Tirpitz and the Warspite are also all pushing this flank. So we're in for some huge trouble, and I mean, we started 2 versus 7, I think. We're now down to a 2 versus 4. Rob Tirpitz comes around the corner, secondary is blazing, but as long as I maintain my angling, those 380mm guns will actually not be able to overmatch my armor. Waiting for his shot, so I can turn and use my back gun. Oh, you saw that? Look at the detected sign. It went from 3 to 2 briefly. Now what does it mean if someone suddenly stops targeting you in a situation like this? Well, the Baltimore and Warspite are not going to stop targeting me, so the reason the Tirpitz stopped targeting me is because he switched to his torpedoes. So I know there's torpedoes coming in right now, so I'm actually stopping my ship because of that priority target giving it a heads up. And there they are. Had I not stopped, I would probably have eaten that torpedo right on the broadside. The problem is, I wanted to be able to outplay this Baltimore, and because of this, I had to slow down to dodge the torpedoes, and the warspite comes around the corner. And even though if angled I could bounce his AP, full broadside I have no chance. Meanwhile, my Scharnhorst is losing to a Graf Spee on the other flank, and this game actually ends up being a loss. It does, however, demonstrate just how well the Wichita can do, as long as you get your own tier matchmaking. I mean, there's no real cruiser that does fantastic when up tiered, so I chose to compare it to its own tier, or well, being top tier. Every cruiser suffers when top tiered. I think the Wichita can do quite well in tier 10, simply because it's got great concealment. However, if it is a carrier heavy game, the Wichita experience will probably not be very enjoyable. The lack of heal and planes negating your lack of concealment and only having 37.9k health means that, well, a lot of ships are going to want to shoot you, a lot of ships are going to want to blap you. The small citadel, however, does alleviate it somehow. You're unlikely to eat those massive devastating strikes, but the constant overmatch from all the battleships is going to make life hard. The agility helps you dodge some of it, but it's going to be an unpleasant experience. But then again, that's most tier 8 cruisers, with few exceptions like Kutuzov who can smoke up or similar things. The game ends. This is running 2 credit flags, the Wyvern and the Zulu, so it does give you some idea, of course, of the monetary benefits you can make. 1.4 million from a loss is not a bad result at all. 144k damage, we got Confederate, Double Strike Croc and High Caliber, a lot of damage, but we did go down and we did lose the game. Team score wise, killing half the enemy team was not quite enough to drag this into a victory. 1.9k base, I did beat their number 1, but ultimately not quite enough for this one. The ability to bounce that Turpit's AP though, you saw how strong it was, and when he gave that broadside, the AP punishment was quite significant even without those super heavy AP shells. So once again, it's not like the AP is bad because it's not super heavy, it's just not quite as good. Detailed report, 1.1 million potential, only 11k spotting. Mostly we ran around killing a lot of DEDs. Well, that's something the ship does very well. 55k HE, 76k AP, and a bit of secondary, amusingly enough, and very little fire damage because all the fires I got were damage con quite quickly. And damage taken, well, the torpedo was probably the biggest single impact I took, and that's because the ship has no torpedo belt. Very vulnerable to those. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, I will start out with the modules. Now, consumable wise, premium damage con, premium radar. Which one you choose of the other consumables? I do really like defensive AA because of all the carrier play, but considering once again the complete lack of torpedo belt and the fact that you like to play very aggressive against DDs in this ship, switching to Hydro isn't necessarily a bad choice in any way. I'll leave this one up to you. I prefer defensive AA because I usually find enough agility to dodge torpedoes, but eating one is not forgiving at all in the Wichita. Upgrade wise, turret survival, followed by rudder survival, followed by improved AA, the AA guns mod 1, which does help bolster it by adding 2 explosions to every salvo, which buffs it from 5 to 7 and from 6 to 8 on the long and medium range. As you can see, the flank is not bad. The DPM is actually quite good, or the DPS, and especially with manual AA and defensive AA active, you do kill planes quite well. You're quite good at defending yourself, not quite as good at defending everyone else. And we can go for the acceleration mod, aka the propulsion mod, instead of the rudder shift, because this ship, as I mentioned, handles extremely well. 6-second rudder shift base is very good for a cruiser, very good for a cruiser. In comparison, the Baltimore sits at 6.3 running the rudder shift mod. So that comparison is obviously pretty significant there. And the turning circle 680, so overall very fast, very agile ship. And better concealment, because, well, obviously that's one of your great strengths. Captain build wise, I'm just straight up running my Des Moines captain. No questions asked. I'm running my Des Moines captain that I never really even respect before this, and that means we're running priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, and concealment expert. That's the base build. Then we want to make use of these special buffs that you get on a John Doe captain, which means improved turret traverse, which makes the sluggish turret traverse on the ship feel a bit more enjoyable at 25.7 seconds. And of course, improved expert loader, which means that instead of having to wait 10 seconds to switch ammo type, we can do it in 2.5. So that's pretty damn... I just love having... I love this John Doe perk on all American heavy cruisers. It's so useful for always having the correct ammo type, especially when the AP is so punishing on the ship. After that, I'm currently running AFT for the improved flak explosion, but that's honestly kind of a leftover from the previous one. Manual AA seems more powerful as an AA perk these days, mostly because it helps buff... Well, not only does it make switching AA faster, but it buffs the AA sector, which in return means that constant damage, that continuous damage, gets buffed directly by it. So instead of having to rely on your flak landing, you can just use that continuous damage to shred the planes. On a ship that is this reliant on flak though, having this 15% improved damage inside the flak explosions isn't necessarily a bad choice. But I'm not really sure I'd pick this as my number one. I think manual AA might just be a more solid one. But as I mentioned, this is my Des Moines captain. The last 2 points we got into Jack of all trades for faster radar usage. More importantly on the Des Moines, of course, this also means faster heal usage. But when you have consumables that you use often like radar defensive and damage con and all of these, then this of course benefits them all. These last 6 points are kind of flexible here, and the base build is what's honestly the most important thing. Flag-wise, well, not too much here. I run the detonation flag, that's mostly because I wanted to test the ship and not detonate. If you don't have too many, just save them. Fire chance is decent, but this isn't exactly an HE spammer. In general, speed is great on the ship because it's already so fast. Faster consumable usage, buffing AA, that's probably the way to go. And as I mentioned, I'm running the 2 credit flags, which is why I made 1.4 million from a loss. You can of course stack more credit flags if you want. You can get a whole lot more percentage going and easily break 2 million if you have a game like that. But that's... I save those for my Missouri or similar ships. Anyways, that was my Wichita commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys later.